Yeah. Hey, Yumi. Hi.
Hello.
Hey, nice shirt.
Nice t-shirt.
Right? Thank you. I know my mom sent me this before I even knew that I was going to be talking to y'all.
Oh,
Really?
wow. That's cool.
Yeah.
Wow.
So I was like, well, I know what I'm wearing when I know what I'm wearing then.
Cool. Hopefully they don't confuse you with me.
Right.
Well, you're not wearing your
welcome.
costumes, though.
No, I didn't wear mine.
Yeah, there we go.
There we go. Well, welcome you two. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, we're
today.
excited.
Appreciate it. Thank you for being together. Also, that helps.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've done a few of these. It's just a tight squeeze here in this little Instagram.
Yeah, I bet.
Good thing we like each other.
Right. Well, I want to just jump right in because I know I have a lot that I could talk to you about personally. But just for everyone else, while we're sort of waiting for people to join us here, just a little bit about MASC, or Multiracial Americans of Southern California. It's a nonprofit that was established in 1986. It's dedicated to the advocacy, education, social justice, and community support for multicultural, multiracial individuals, couples, families, and they have all kinds of resources for the community. Everything from networking, education, social activism, community action, and great little events like these. Now, I'm going to just get right into it with the two of you. I have to say right off, I've been listening to the podcast.
Oh, yeah?
I've been going on a deep dive with the podcast the last couple of days, and I'm actually learning a whole lot, so please keep it up. I don't know if there's plans to keep it going or not, but I hope that there is.
We do. That's you're
reminder.
referencing to our Love Discovery and Dim Sum podcast.
Right.
On Instagram, it's LDD podcast. We do. We're going like every couple weeks. We are maybe moving into a different format as well, but we do plan on keeping the podcast and maybe eventually having different guests come on.
Right.
Yeah, it really started out as an extension of us kind of talking about things we discovered outside of the film. We could only cram so much in the film, and
Right.
we just discovered all this amazing family stories from other people or history that other people don't know. And then, lately it's kind of turned into a conversation about identity and race and all the things that, we explore in our film, and we've just been able to unpack it more in our podcast.
And just because I like dim sum.
Yeah,
Right.
and
So we had to throw in some dim sum in there.
Right.
Sure. I love that. Well, just to introduce the two of you, I know we're getting some people joining us. These are the filmmakers from the documentary film called Far East, Deep South, and it's just great, you guys. I mean, I have a very personal connection to it even before I saw it, which I'm sure we'll touch on, but I learned so much from it, and it was very emotional, and I got such a sense of pride from it, and nostalgic, just the whole gambit. So I really appreciate it, and I'm so glad that you made it and it's out there. And but speaking of which, how is it getting out there during the pandemic? Because I know that's got to be a little different. Well, just quickly to mention, you also made a short film called Finding Cleveland.
Yes.
And that was, I want to say, in 2015? Or
Yes.
it was released in
Yes.
2015?
I think you're correct.
About there. So I know this experience with Far East Deep South has had to be very different from that experience. As far as getting the film out there with the festivals, I know, for example, the Oxford Film Festival was virtual.
Yes.
I was looking forward to seeing Far East Deep South in person in Newport.
Oh,
And
yeah.
it got canceled. So what has that experience been like in comparison?
We had our world premiere at CineQuest in San Jose in March. I think it was March 7th and 8th. And, you know, all of you guys know what happened after that. Everything got shuttered. We at least got 2 screenings out of it. We were supposed to have a third, and that all got canceled and postponed. CineQuest is supposed to be now, well, they were holding out hope for this month to go, you know, in person, but because of conditions, they have decided to go virtual with the second half of their festival. All the festivals so far that we've been in, some of them have canceled completely, or, you know, either deferred to 2021 or are going virtual in the fall. Newport Beach is hanging on to dear life that they'll be able to do it in person sometime. I don't know when that will be. So you may still be able to see it in person.
Okay, great.
So, but it's been interesting because we've had to be creative. Even our like distribution release schedule has kind of shifted.
Yep.
So we're working on all that. You know, for those of you who are watching our film, if you're in Texas, I don't know if anybody, I know this is a SoCal group, but if you know friends in Texas, and there's a lot of, you know, former Mississippians that all migrated over to Texas, and the Women Texas Film Festival is doing their virtual film festival August 15th. We're going to be showing our film. So if people are in Texas or, you know, can migrate, it is online, but they geo-blocked it. So you have to have you have to physically be in Texas.
Okay.
Or your internet has to be in Texas.
Right. And we are working on an LA area one in the fall. The date's not locked in yet, so you will be able to see it in LA area online.
Best thing is to follow us at fareastdeepsouth.com or jump on our mailing list. Do they even know what we're trying to get them to watch?
I don't know. Did we actually talk about the movie? It's about deep fried dim sum. No.
Not yet, but that was going to be my next question. I don't want to give away any spoilers. But
right. Thank you.
Could you, for the people that don't know, luckily I'm grateful that I have seen it, but for the people that don't know, could you give us a little insight into what the film is about, and so we can go from there?
Yeah.
Yeah, so the story starts off, it's basically a story of my search for my family roots, and it takes us from California, a family that had no idea where our past was, and it led us to the Deep South, into the Mississippi Delta. And that's where we find the gravesite of my grandfather and great-grandfather. And that's the first time we've ever had an experience to even find that history in our past.
Because you actually didn't know anything about your grandfather or great-grandfather, because your dad basically grew up fatherless.
Correct.
Came over from China, but never knew anything about that side of the family. And so, while we went to Mississippi to look for just a gravesite, we ended up uncovering so much more, which is why there's a spoiler alert. Very few documentaries will come with the spoiler alert. But as you know, Reed, the way things unfold, and I appreciate you respecting it, it does unfold a little bit like a mystery. And so there are some major surprises that we uncover. We can tell people that there's some personal things that we uncover that are surprises. The thing that we can reveal is we also just uncovered the little known history of the early Chinese in Mississippi during segregation. I know, Reed, you probably know more about that because you have a personal connection, but we knew nothing. We both grew up in California, had no idea that there was this rich history, because we never hear about it in history books or in media.
Right. And that's, I want to get to the meat of that, but then that's why I wanted you to sort of explain what the film is about and where it came from, where the idea came from, without, giving away too much. But I'm with you. I grew up there in Mississippi. I'm half Chinese. I know about, Mississippi Delta Chinese, but
Right.
that's about it. I'm trying to think. I may have read one sentence, maybe, in a textbook about the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882.
Right.
That's one more
But-
sentence than I got
Yeah,
when I was
I
growing
didn't
up.
even read
Right. And, I asked my sister, she was like, oh, I've never heard of that. So, when it came up in the film, then I started to do a deep dive on
Right.
Right.
all kinds of things of
Right.
that nature, the history, the heritage. I know a little bit about my own family's history, but I had no idea that any of that was going on, all the way to why Chinese were even in Mississippi to begin with.
Right.
Right.
And
Now,
so much of it.
I know there's some a point in the film about, and I kind of want to at least touch on this, that there's some similarities to the Chinese American experience, at least in the South during segregation, and the Black community's
Yeah.
experience. And I know that y'all know at this point way more than I do about it. So I wonder if you could just kind of expound on that, again, without giving too much
Sure.
away.
Yeah, I mean, it's not too far of a stretch to just talk a little bit more about the Chinese Exclusion Act and how that's a part of our film, because it was something that we didn't know anything really about. And the Chinese Exclusion Act started in 1882, and what we didn't know, and what the film does talk about, is its impact on families, not just on one family or not just on one generation, but for multiple generations, and that there were consequences to this act. So viewers and people can easily go and look up, on the internet about what the Chinese Exclusion Act was, or watch the PBS special on the Chinese Exclusion Act and get a real detailed, in-depth part of it. But what our story ends up doing is capturing what were the consequences of that on a personal level, on a family level. And
Exactly.
that explains why my family, my generation, was separated from my great-grandfather's generation. And even though we have a long lineage in America, why didn't we know each other? And those are the things that we bring to the audience. And
Well, and basically, for those who aren't familiar with it, Chinese were not allowed to become citizens after the act was passed in 1882. They were restricted to come to the country, and they couldn't become, couldn't become citizens, right? So
Right.
there was a lot of things, and women. There's like a whole host of discriminatory acts, and it was really the beginning of our restrictive immigration system in this country.
Mhm.
And a lot of people don't know that. And going back to your original question of where the intersection is in the South between the Black and the Asian community, specifically the Chinese. While this was happening during the Chinese Exclusion Act, the Chinese also had to deal with all the Jim Crow laws, which a lot of people don't realize impacted them. And not just the Chinese. In our film, I specifically showed some visual images where there's signs in different parts of the country, like Native Americans, like no Indians, no beer served to Indians was my favorite.
Right.
Where like really they're not allowed to have beer, or
Very
the fact that,
specific.
or like no Mexicans allowed in this one store, or my favorite, not my favorite, but like one of the most sobering scenes, I should say, is the segregated cemeteries, where even in death,
Yeah.
the Chinese couldn't even be buried in their own cemetery. So that's one of many things. And then of course Baldwin's grandfather and great grandfather had to live, and almost all the Chinese had to live in the Black neighborhoods because they were not allowed in the white neighborhoods. And Baldwin, you can share more about the whole grocery store and the credit.
yeah, I mean, one of the things that we uncover in the film is this dynamic between the early Chinese and the Black community. And during those times, how did they survive when we had all these laws that were against us? So
Right.
one of the things we found out was that not only did the Chinese live in the Black community, but because the Chinese Exclusion Act forced Chinese off of labor in the fields and the plantations, they ended up owning grocery stores. And the grocery stores are not like today's small businesses where you get all the tax credits. It's a luxury for you to own a small business, and everybody commends you and wants to give you business because you're a small business. No, that was the hard,
glamorous.
Right? It was easy to make money as a laborer back then, right? 150 years ago, you go out there and you hustle.
Not that that wasn't easy work.
That wasn't easy work either,
Right.
That was a lot easier than being a Chinese guy saying the only thing you can do is go in a grocery store, right?
Or any type of business.
Or any type of business. So they had this symbiotic relationship in the Black community where they served the Black community, and the Black community gave them business, and they needed each other. And so you have to remember, and the stories we've captured in the film really was a surprise to us because we weren't sure how or what the responses were going to be from the Black community. We went out there and we searched them out, and it took us a while before we can actually find them and say, like, would you be willing to talk to us about your family's experience with the Chinese that lived in this area? And the stories were amazing.
We were surprised because, today there's sometimes a little tension between store owners, in Black communities Asian store owners in Black communities today. And we, again, the context was completely different. We're talking the early 1900s, right now.
Right.
The things were very, very different. And the fact that remembering, white banks were not going to loan credit to Blacks, and white stores were not going to loan credit or, let alone let them through the front door. And the Chinese actually let the Blacks through the front door. The Black community were treated with respect in the Chinese store compared to white stores. And, because most of them were sharecroppers in that area, they were only getting paid once or twice a year. And so the Chinese stores actually loaned them credit. Especially there's a story in our film about during the Great Depression, somebody talked about how his great grandfather loaned all his customers, regardless of color.
Right.
Credit.
So when you remember the Great Depression was also happening in this era, and it's not like, oh, during the Great Depression, they just offer stimulus packages to everyone, right? So not only were they, in a bad, time financially, they extended credit to the Black community. So when the Black community said, like, hey, we don't have money, and these grocery stores said, well, we have stock, but, what do we do with it? Instead of letting it go rot, they said, fine, take the food, take what you need, write it in the book. We trust you that you will pay it back. And then we actually heard from the Black community saying they trusted us. Like, no one else would trust us. If I went to another store, maybe a white-owned store, and I said I had no money, they'd be like, get out of here, right?
Right.
And so those are the types of relationships that we brought out in the film, and we were able to experience. And we really hope that what this does is that it normalizes the conversation, first off, of what it means to be American. And then hopefully what it does is it brings people together to say, yes, we have shared struggles, shared history together. So just because I don't look like you or speak like you,
it's not in our history books.
And it's not in our history, but doesn't mean that I can't fully understand something that you might have gone through. And so if we have a shared history, if we can see ourselves together in the past, then we can do things together now so that we can see ourselves together in the future.
Yeah, and I think also just the fact that I know we took our short film around to schools, and even we took, Far East Deep South, some early versions to a few schools. And I think, talking to different teachers, they were saying, especially like the Asian American population sometimes feels a disconnect to learning about the history of segregation and slavery. And, sure, we all learn it, and it's very, very important, especially, in light of all the events that are happening now. But, a lot of us learned it, wrote our essays, checked it, know it's wrong, and have moved on. But we didn't really know about the other injustices or just how it personally affected us. Or as we mentioned about the Chinese Exclusion Act, it's like, oh, wait, there's a whole lot of bad stuff that happened to Asians that we just didn't learn about. And there's a lot of oppression and discrimination. So it I think, sheds a light in a lot of different ways on the race, dynamics.
Especially when the immigration stuff really impacts the Hispanic community, the Latinx community right now. It's like, oh, well, we kind of should know what happened to our people, right, back in the day, and why those laws now affect you. So maybe that can bridge more gaps about understanding between each other.
Exactly. And I think you did a wonderful job in the film of touching on several of these, I guess, points, without straying too far from the journey of your family. Just one example is sharecropping. I being from Mississippi, I didn't know that if you're a sharecropper, you only get paid when you
have
essentially
crops.
sell your crops,
Yeah.
you know? Or, you know, it just didn't occur to me, I suppose. And
Yeah.
so you're only getting paid once a year. How are you supposed to survive without someone trusting you to give you credit, for example? Now, I wanted to, well, I first had to ask, when you went to Mississippi, was that the first time that either of you had been to the South at all?
I've been to Tennessee.
Yeah, we've been to Nashville
Georgia.
and Atlanta.
Okay.
Like North Carolina, South
Yeah, I've
Carolina.
been to North Carolina as
But
well.
that was my first time to
Virginia,
Mississippi.
yeah.
Mississippi specifically. And I imagine that small of a town, I mean, Pace, not just Cleveland, but Pace.
Oh, yeah, Pace is probably the smallest town we have ever been in.
Right.
I think
what was your... Yeah, right.
We may have.
What was your initial reaction? Because you both grew up in California, different areas,
right,
but in California, correct?
Yes, yeah.
So what was your initial take when you go to this small town in Mississippi, knowing that you have some family roots there somewhere?
Yeah, well, the first thing I was like, I wasn't sure what to really expect, because you know, in media, on TV, and even in just the way people talk and joke about the South, I felt like, oh, okay, should I be scared to go to Mississippi? Should I be defensive? You know, do I need to watch my back? And then when I tell people I'm going there, their comments to me doesn't reassure me either. They're like, oh my,
good luck with that, you know.
Yeah.
And but when we got there, I was really surprised. Like, people did look at us. They reacted to us differently, but it wasn't because I was Chinese, because apparently they've seen Chinese people there before.
Right.
In the Mississippi Delta, which is where we spent. Now, I can't speak for other parts of Mississippi outside the Delta, but people in the Delta were used to seeing us. And so we were the family from California. No one ever referred to us as the Chinese family. We were just the Californians. And that's why people would look at us funny, or they were like, why are you here?
That was weird.
What are you doing here from California?
Right.
They're like, hey, you have a funny accent. I was like, no, you have a funny accent. Well, you have a Southern accent. No, you have a California. Right. That's weird.
Yeah, it was a culture clash, but more of a West Coast versus South.
For sure. Now, just a quick point to that. Did you love the food immediately? Are you hooked now? Are you like, wait, everything's fried. What does that mean?
The most disappointing thing about the Oxford Film Festival being canceled in person is that they normally do this really, really well. And then, going down there and we go visit everybody, everybody like invites us over to their house. Like when we went to Pace and you meet the mayor, Levon Jackson there, he actually made ribs for us that day.
Not just for us.
No, for the whole crew.
Right, yeah.
And not only, I think he had...
It was the whole spread. It wasn't just ribs. It was like... It's coleslaw and cornbread and
mashed potatoes,
collard greens and the whole 9 yards.
So the cool thing was, like, the day we met Mayor Levon Jackson in our film, and in case you guys don't know, he is black because we're in this black community. It was Oktoberfest on the same day. And so the entire...
Not the German one.
Not the German one. Well, they were celebrating with beer still. But the entire city of Pace, which was just a few hundred people, right? Maybe 100 or so, a couple hundred people. They were all in that area where you see in the film where the store was in that big empty land. They were all there, and there was barbecue, there was food, there was live music. And so when Mayor Jackson invited us over, like, he not only had food enough for us and our crew, I think he just started inviting random people from the city.
Because that's what happens in the South. Everybody just invites people over.
It's like, come on over. Like, so you finish getting your barbecue out there, and then you come over to his house and you get some more barbecue.
Exactly. No, that hits on a point. Just to bring
fried okra. Someone mentioned fried okra, and yes, the only okra I like is fried okra.
I don't like tamales, but I will eat fried tamales from the South, especially if they're smothered in gravy.
Oh yeah, basically anything for me. You fry it, smother it in gravy, I'm good to go.
So we're looking for
Twinkies, whatever it is.
I know. So we gain 5 pounds every time we go.
I'm waiting for deep fried dim sum, like Chinese style deep fried dim sum, right? Throw like a char siu bao in there and just put some batter and deep fry that. Let's see how that turns out.
We're gonna have to go back and start a little a food truck or something.
I know.
Yeah, like a fried dim sum truck.
Fried dim sum.
Let's do that.
That sounds amazing.
Or we could do it here in LA.
We can do that here in LA.
Oh, people would love it.
Another name.
Yeah,
I call it the
Mississippi. In Mississippi, I feel like I'm sure you can get dim sum, but I never had it in Mississippi.
I think you have to go to Memphis.
They said,
Yeah, you have to go up to Memphis.
I heard there's one in Oxford.
I think there is now.
Yes.
Which is really good news. I lived there for a bit, and it definitely wasn't there when I lived there. But, now, just to your point of the mayor inviting people over, there's a point in the film, and it turns out it's actually my great uncle, Luck Wing,
Yeah.
that mentions it in the film. About Sunday afternoon being the time to socialize, because everybody's working all the time.
Right.
Right.
Sunday afternoon is the only time to socialize, so that's when I'm used to big gatherings and enormous spreads of food that you eat more than once in a single day. You know, that's not news to me. I see that now that I live in California as well, I see that it's slightly different out here, but how did you discover my family? So for those of you that know, my grandmother and my great uncle are both in the film, make a little appearance.
Yeah. Very important part of the film too.
Now, how did you discover and the connection to my family? And the reason why I ask is because I feel like a lot of people, especially with 23andMe and Ancestry.com and whatever, and maybe particularly during the pandemic, I feel like now more than ever are looking to find their roots.
Right.
And that is what your film is essentially all about, right? So when you went to Mississippi first, actually, let's start before that. How did you even discover that you had roots in Mississippi?
Yeah, so basically we were looking through some old photos, and as I recalled looking through some old photos, I recalled that my dad had mentioned in the past when I was younger that my grandfather was from Mississippi or was buried there. But this was when I was really young, and it was something that he never wanted to talk about. That's something about, I guess, Asian and old fathers, and they just really don't want to dig out the hardships of the past. They're just they're focused on today's struggles and trying to just break through today's struggles and stereotypes and all that stuff. So I never really knew. But then I guess my brother had brought it back up again and said, like, hey, didn't we recall something about Mississippi? And so the whole trip to Mississippi was my brother coming up with the idea, saying, like, let's celebrate my parents' anniversary, their 40th anniversary, by making a trip out to Mississippi to figure out where our family really came from. And my dad finally, like, oh, okay. I'm like, oh, okay, so let's go, right?
Yeah.
No idea what we were going to find.
Right.
Yeah,
the right person had to ask. Right?
Yeah, and you knew nothing. I mean, it was weird when we first met. We've been married 12 years now, and I remember we were talking about, you just get to know, the person you're going to marry, and you want to know about their family. So, like, oh, what about your dad's family? Do we have anything? Do we have any relatives to invite to the wedding? No. And I'm like, do you know anything about your family? No. And it's like, my dad doesn't talk about it. And I was like, okay. So I just dropped it. And now I know why, I made a movie about it. And we know it was because there was some childhood trauma of him being,
fatherless, basically.
Fatherless.
Right.
And him not also knowing a whole lot as well. So, that's how we ended up in Mississippi.
I see. And it's really powerful, y'all. And,
y'all,
yeah, right. It comes out every now and then.
Yeah. How did we find? I was going to say we didn't ever answer your other question about
your family,
about Luck and.
Well, yeah, really, it's really a question of are there any tips for the rest of us? Because you did a really good job, I think, of going to find your specific your grandfather and your great grandfather, but then you discovered. There was a whole journey of discovery there that you kept going the extra step, to go to the museum and, et cetera. And then talking to people, and then people started to reach out to you.
Yeah.
So how did you get that ball rolling? Because I feel like,
Yeah.
I know I would like to know more, and so I feel like maybe people watching this,
Yeah.
would like some tips or some homework or, whatever you could offer.
Well, really what it started off as was when we got there, we just started asking anybody, any stranger, anyone we could.
Well, actually, even before that, his brother just called City Hall. He actually tells, his brother tells a funny story. It's not in our film. It got cut, but he loved the show Parks and Recreation, which I love too. And if you watch that show, Amy Poehler, is a character in there, and she's kind of like the know-it-all of the city. And so he just kind of figured, if I called City Hall, maybe I can find a Leslie Knope, know-it-all in City Hall there. And then his other thought was, it can't be that big of a town. I will just go to every cemetery in town and just drive around, so that was basically his methodology in the start.
Yeah. And then we started asking, once we found the museum, we started talking.
City Hall told him about the Chinese Heritage Museum. Yeah.
And then we just started asking questions, and then they started asking questions, and then they started reaching out to people, and then we started calling people.
So yeah, once we met Emily at the museum, she then fanned out the network of, finding people, and then people started coming out of the woodwork. But that was crazy. And I think that's probably why you got connected with Luck and Martha.
We got connected with Luck and Martha, I think, because through the museum, and then also through we discovered the family that bought my great-grandfather's store, or my grandfather's store, and we got connected to them. And then through the artifacts they had, we read names, and actually it would be your uncle,
your great uncle, Edwin.
Right.
Edwin
right.
was a pallbearer.
Was a pallbearer for my grandfather.
For your grandfather.
Right. So we're like, who's this Edwin Howe?
Yeah, we just started going the names. We found an obituary, and that's where we just
started messaging everybody, like, who's he? Do you know Edwin Howe? He's on the obituary. And eventually it led to your grandmother. Yeah,
obituaries are really, I know it's a very morbid, way to start this conversation, but about finding your roots, but it really is a great information, because back in the day, everybody published an obituary. That people didn't post on Facebook like they do now, and so there's so many newspaper resources. Chronicling America, which is part of the Library of Congress, has a lot of the old newspapers. Newspapers.com, which is a paid service, also has a huge bank of newspapers that you can search, relatives' names. And you'd be surprised, like we searched, after the fact, we searched for an article, or we just searched his great-grandfather's name, Chas J. Liu. And it's not in our film, but we found some article about him, like, having a lawsuit or something. He was involved in a lawsuit.
Oh, really?
And, like, it was just like, oh, okay.
Well, that's great. I agree. Obituaries have a certain stigma, I suppose, but they do give you names, so it's a great place to start, even though, it was a couple of steps down the line for y'all.
We're actually, this weekend, we're actually talking more about it, more in depth on our.
We're doing a webinar, a live webinar, a Zoom meeting on August. I don't even know what month it is. August 8th, Saturday morning, 10 a.m. Pacific. It's free to sign up. I think if you go to our Far East Deep South .com website, or if you go to our Instagram page, Far East Deep South, you can go to click on the link there. You can sign up for free on Eventbrite to get the link if you're interested in hearing more about. We're going to go more specifically in all the research. And our steps.
Oh, great!
Because it's a bit of a long story.
And organizations we tied into that led us to
other resources in talking about the Chinese exclusion files that we find in the National Archives and things like that, and other tips that we can give, because not that we're the experts, but we definitely help and want to help other people start their roots. Thanks.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks.
Oh, great. That's
great. Yeah. I think I
think that might be Sonia there.
Yeah. That's perfect. Well, and that's a perfect, I don't want to take up too much of your time, and that's a perfect segue. What is the best way for people to see the film, to get more information? We mentioned the podcast again, which I love. How and where do people find out more about the film, the podcast? this event on Saturday, etc. FarEastDeepSouth.com.
.com is the best way. They can watch the trailer there. They can subscribe to our newsletter too to get the latest updates. As we mentioned earlier, because of COVID, screenings are kind of being negotiated, or if people are watching that have an organization or company that wants to sponsor a private screening, we can talk a little bit more about how that happens virtually in this space.
We've been doing some diversity programs with the companies to say, hey, we want to show your film privately to just our company. So, there's ways for us to set that up while we're waiting for it to be.
Oh, that's great. Okay.
So people don't have to wait. Contact us directly through the website. We answer everything directly.
So that's the best way. And you can follow us on Instagram. But we're hoping the film will be out more as things progress. We're working on some things we can't announce quite yet, but more virtual film festivals, and hopefully one day we'll get to see everybody in person again.
Right. Exactly. Well, thanks so much, you two, for being on, sharing your experience. It was a real pleasure. Like I say, I feel like I could talk to you for a really long time. We're gonna have to get dim sum together.
We will definitely connect some more outside of this, and would love to hear what you learned growing up about your family, because what I've also learned too is that sometimes the family members were thinking like you guys should know everything, and apparently you guys don't always know everything.
Right, exactly. We like I said, I was talking to my sister. The two of us, we feel like we know nothing, maybe just a little bit about our own family, but past that, there's that one sentence in that one textbook maybe, and then that's it. So thank you I know this probably wasn't the original intention of doing your film, but thank you for what it turned into, because it has led me to discover a lot about my own history, my own family, and just American history, not just Asian American history, but American history, in general. So I'm very grateful. Thank you again for your time. Everybody go to FarEastDeepSouth.com, and can't wait to see you in person.
Same here.
Same here.
Hey,
Thank you so much.
All right. Thanks so much, y'all.
Bye, everyone. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.